I noticed there's been a lot of talk about canceled priests lately, and also notice there's a lot of confusion about canceled priests. So I'm going to talk about some canceled priests, recently canceled, and historically we'll go back in time, then we'll come back, we'll go back and forth, and hopefully you'll get a better understanding. So usually when they refer to canceled priests, they're referring to someone who's excommunicated, laicized, or suspended. So excommunication can be understood if you read the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 15 through 18. It explains it pretty well. It's where it says, if a brother sins against you, go to him one-on-one. If he doesn't listen, bring a witness. If he doesn't listen to a witness, bring him before the church. If he doesn't listen to the church, then treat him as if he's a pagan. And it doesn't mean you're going to hell. It doesn't mean, you're condemned to hell. It's Jesus gave this discipline to the church to discipline. It's kind of like putting your kid for timeout, hoping the kid will realize his mistake and repent. So it's a remedy for a disobedient priest to bring him back in. Laicized, so if you're excommunicated, you cannot administer the sacraments, and you cannot even participate in the sacraments. You can go to church and listen to mass, but you can't receive communion, you can't receive confession. I mean, it's a pretty bad place to be. I wouldn't want to be there. Laicized means that you can't administer the sacraments. You can't hear confession, you can't do the mass, but you can receive it like a layman. Basically, if you're laicized, you're made a layman. Laicized layman. That's how I remember that. And then suspended, you're not excommunicated or laicized. You're just fired, basically. Like, say you were a bishop of a diocese, and they're like, no, we need you to step down. We're going to replace you. That's kind of what suspension would be. Now, whenever I talk about these controversial subjects, we live in a hypersensitive world and people's feelings get hurt and they always unsubscribe. So probably going to get a lot of people unsubscribing today. So if you like it, please subscribe and share this. But honestly, I'm going to just stick to the facts. I'm going to try and keep my personal opinion out of each priest I mention and just give you the facts that are public. Everything I'm saying is public. You can look this up. Okay, so we're going to start with the first priest, Pope Francis, excommunicated. Totally like the worst of the three things that I mentioned that can happen to priests. First one was a priest named Father Greg Reynolds. Was right out of the gate, 2013. And Pope Francis excommunicated him for teaching heresy in violation of Canon Law 1369, speaking publicly against church teaching. Father Greg Reynolds was advocating same-sex marriages and advocating ordaining women. He was spoke to a few times, just like we're taught in Matthew 18, and he was disobedient. He kept doing it. He kept disobeying the church. So he was the first priest Pope Francis excommunicated, 2013. Also in 2013, I don't know if he was the second. It seems, I was looking at the timeline. It seems like he's the second priest Pope Francis excommunicated. The first one, Greg Reynolds, was in Australia, I believe. The second one was from Brazil, Father Roberto Francisco Daniel. He was also excommunicated in 2013 for preaching and teaching that homosexual acts is not sinful. Again, he was spoke to several times, disobeyed the Pope, went against church teaching, and he too was excommunicated, the worst of the three, for violating Canon Law 1369, again, teaching against church teachings. Then we go back in time, 1953, Father Feeney, so 1953, well before Vatican II, Father Feeney was excommunicated for teaching that non-Catholic Christians or non-Catholics can't be saved. And he was taught, he was again, like Matthew 18:15-18, he was warned, you got to stop teaching that. And he kept quoting Vatican I, there's no salvation outside the Catholic Church. And they were explaining to him he was taking that out of context, he misunderstood it, and he needs to stop teaching that. And it's funny because a lot of my Protestant brothers, when I say no doctrine has been changed in 2,000 years of the Catholic Church, they always throw this in my face. Well, Vatican I taught non-Catholics couldn't be saved. Vatican II taught. And when I was coming back to the church, I read all the councils, and I could see that they took it out of context. The continuity is there between every ecumenical council of the church. So anyway, Father Feeney kept being disobedient, saying no, non-Catholics can't be saved. So he was excommunicated. This is 1953. Let me go back in time. 1871, Father Johann Joseph von Dollinger rejected Vatican I, specifically rejected papal infallibility, and he was excommunicated for this. Now, he had already started the old Catholics who rejected a lot of the church teachings, specifically saying the Mass in Latin. He said that the church went away from tradition. In the first 3 centuries it was said, or actually the first 4 centuries, it was said in the vernacular, which is true. But the church decided it would be better for this time period to say it in Latin. And he said, no, he knew better than the church. So again, he was excommunicated for disobeying the Pope. It's always disobedience. Disobeying the Pope. And then, he started this little cult. He started the old Catholics, and then they broke off. And just like every Protestant, you start off like with one group, and then they break off, and they always end up becoming liberal. The old Catholics now, who consider themselves the traditionalists back in the 1800s, now some of their branches, again, not all of them, some of them ordain women. But he said he was the true Catholics. The old Catholics were the true Catholics. This modern stuff is not Catholicism. That was his stance, and he was excommunicated. Father Johann Joseph von Dollinger, 1871. Then if we go back even further, the most popular priest ever excommunicated, 1521, Martin Luther. And again, Martin Luther claimed the church had left the tradition, and he and his followers were the true Catholics. And I even have Protestant friends today will say they are the true Catholics, that we went away. And I'll get comments from pretty educated guys. They still believe that we left tradition of the church, that we changed. Martin Luther, he got a lot of followers because he pointed out a lot of corruption in the church, and the church agreed. But where he erred was trying to change church doctrine and say, no, I didn't change, you guys changed. Because again, he misunderstood the teachings of the church, and he thought he knew better than the church. So these last two are a little different than the first two. The first two wanted to change the church. They were saying the church needs to modernize. And when I first came back to the Catholic Church, I noticed that. I'm like, why do liberals stay in the Catholic Church? And I realized they think they can change it. They think that the church is going to change. And I seen a liberal reporter ask Pope Francis early on, do you think the church will ever ordain women? And he's like, no, I can't change that. No church. Jesus ordained 12 men as apostles. This is from Jesus. We cannot change this. It'll never change. And this is what liberals don't understand. They think they're going to change it. It'll never change, because Pope Francis is such a loving and merciful Christian, and he reached out to the gay community in love. People thought he was going to change the teaching on that, and an Associated Press, just right like 2023, asked him straight up, is homosexuality a sin? And he said, yes, homosexuality is a sin. Like straight, boom. So the liberals, I don't know why they hang around, they think they're going to change it. But what's different with Johann Joseph von Dollinger, Ignaz von Dollinger, I guess his name is Father Johann Joseph Ignaz von Dollinger, 1871, and Martin Luther, they think that they're the true Catholics, and we changed. They're like, we didn't change, you changed. So that was their argument. But now coming closer to today, I remember a couple of years ago, a guy in church heard I had a channel, and he said, oh man, he goes, I'm friends with this awesome priest, Father Frank Pavone. And I was, kind of new revert, so I wasn't real familiar with him. He goes, man, he's a strong pro-life guy. He's right here, like 30 minutes from the church. Maybe you can get an interview with him. So I called his office, and they were like so nice. They're like, you know what? Instead of doing Zoom, you live so close. Why don't you come down? We have like a real television studio. You can interview him in here and put it on your channel. It'll be yours, but you can use our, state-of-the-art television. I was like, dude, this is so cool. Yeah, awesome. Let's do this. And we set up a date. It was like a couple of weeks out. And I was all excited. And I told a really strong pro-life priest that I know. Figured, man, he would be so excited about this. Holy priest, outspoken from the pulpit, on pro-life issues, telling people it's a sin to vote for pro-choice candidates. I mean, just a really strong conservative Catholic priest. And I told him, and he got a worried look on his face, and he said, Frank, Father Pavone has done a lot of great work. He's done tremendous work for the pro-life community, but you can't interview him. And I'm like, why? It's like he's disobedient to his bishop. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, you have to understand, as a priest, it is vital to be obedient to your bishop. And his diocese is in Texas, I believe. And his bishop allowed him to come to Florida to do this pro-life work. And now, I guess he got a new bishop, and the bishop is saying, now it's time to come back to your diocese. We need you in Texas. And he said, it's been going on for years. He said, you'll be in defiance of our bishop if you talk to this guy. So I was like really saddened. I was like, what am I going to do? Because the Bible says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. I didn't want to cancel on this guy. But I'm like, I don't want to be disobedient to my bishop. That's not a good place to be. So I prayed about it, and then we had a hurricane, and I called, and they said, yeah. I said, I'm not going to be able to do this interview due to everything that's going on. And they're like, no, we understand. We figured, you postpone it. Just call us when you can do it. So I haven't done it, but so then when I heard that Frank Pavone was excommunicated, I made a video about him, and I'll condense it real short. I gave an analogy of being a military guy, seeing it like the military. Say there was a guy in the army, gets a Purple Heart, shot up in Iraq or Afghanistan, and then he goes back to Iraq and puts his life at risk, getting shot up again, but this time saves his whole unit, putting his life in jeopardy, and he gets the highest medal, the Medal of Honor. And then he sees what's happening over there, and he just wants to save everybody he can, but his general calls him and says, okay, you need to come back to the States. And he says, no. And the general keeps saying, no, you need to come back to the States. Eventually that man is going to be disciplined, dishonorably discharged, and thrown out of the army. And you're going to say, this guy's a Medal of Honor hero. How is he dishonorably discharged? Because he couldn't obey. And all his veterans would be like, man, that's sad. That's sad. I wonder what happened to him. We would still consider him a hero. We would still consider him a Medal of Honor recipient and salute to him every time we see him. We would show him that respect he was due, but we would understand the military did the right thing, because you cannot have disobedience in the ranks. If everybody thought, well, I'm too good to listen to the general, you know, I'm a Medal of Honor, I got 3 Purple Hearts, the military would be disarray. And God is a God of order. That's why he gave us a church. That's why we're Catholic, you know. We're not Protestants. We don't get to disobey the Pope. It's just the Protestant thing to do. So a lot of people thought that was unfair. I didn't, you know. And again, this is probably going to offend a lot of people that love Frank Pavone. But I noticed Frank Pavone doesn't wear his collar, doesn't present himself as a priest. He's still doing that strong pro-life work he does. And I'm not going to judge his heart. You know, he feels he's doing what God's calling him to do. That's between him and God and him and the church, but I don't think the church did anything wrong. You know, I pray one day he can reconcile with the church and become a priest again. But in the meantime, you know, he's not doing any masses. He's obedient. Now he seems to be obedient, where he's not doing any masses, not presenting himself as a priest. So maybe he is repenting, and, as far as I can see. Then there's Father James Altman. And, people tell me, oh, you would love Altman. People that know my stance on the jabs. And I can't go too much into it because I've had a lot. I was shadow banned. I was demonetized for like half a year. And had a lot of videos taken down. So I've actually made a Rumble channel, but I don't do much on it because Rumble, you got to be freaking software engineer to figure out how to upload videos. It takes me days to get a video. So I haven't done it in a while. But I did quite a few on jabs. I've been anti-jab for 35 years. And when the pandemic happened and that jab came, I actually predicted how it would happen. And people were like, oh man, you love this guy. He preaches against the jab all the time. But then when I listened to him, I heard like this defiant guy, like bad mouthing the Pope. I'm like, is this guy Protestant or Catholic? Because, I was listening and I'm like, he's got a collar. I guess he's Catholic. But he's talking about the Pope worse than I talked about him when I was an anti-Catholic evangelical back in the day. I was like, what is up with this guy? And he just kept bashing the church because the church wasn't allowing us to have mass. And I disagree with it. But again, I'm just a soldier. The general says don't have mass. I'm not going to question I'm going to pray for the general, but I'm not going to badmouth the general. I'm not going to disobey the general. But this guy was outright like telling the flock to disobey the Pope and like just badmouthing him. And eventually he got suspended, not laicized, not excommunicated, suspended. And what's he do? He does a GoFundMe, and according to the papers, he got like over $1 million in his GoFundMe, bought a nice house. And I was like, this is a little sus, a little suspicious to me. I don't know. I'm being honest. And then he was told not to present himself as a priest, not to wear his collar, not to do mass. Again, nothing official that he was excommunicated or laicized, but he's kept doing mass, kept his collar on, and then came out, said the Pope isn't the Pope. He's an anti-Pope. He became a full sedevacanist. And according to canon law, you're excommunicating yourself. So I would assume he excommunicated himself like Vigano excommunicated himself, but the church hasn't officially announced it. So, I guess we should still call him Father until we hear the official announcement from the church. But then he went even further. And I seen this and I posted videos of it and called the Pope an Antichrist. And kind of ironically, that's what Martin Luther called the Pope. That's what Ignaz von Dollinger, the old Catholic guy who rejected Vatican I, called the Pope. So now Father Altman is not supposed to be presenting himself as a priest, not supposed to be participating in mass, and he's doing both of these things, and he's calling himself a canceled priest. Like, oh, poor pitiful me, I'm canceled. Go to my GoFundMe. And again, I normally get people mad, but getting back to people surprised that I didn't like his stance on the jabs when I've been anti-jab most of my life. Every jab, this one wasn't that much worse than all the other ones, to be honest, if you do your research. But I hurt my shoulder at work earlier. Be careful. But this is why I always tell people, it's not who's right that matters, it's what's right. So people like a certain guy because of what he says, and then they think he can do no wrong. I could like a certain guy and disagree with him, you know? And it was no surprise to me, and I said it in my YouTube, you know, my Rumble, the YouTube videos that are down. I'm not surprised how the church reacted, because this is how the church has always reacted with me. You know, in Protestantism, people thought I was crazy with my stance on jabs. And I wasn't surprised that the Catholic Church had the same stance as most of the Protestant churches. It's just, you know, this is how most people feel. And they think they're doing good. They think they're protecting people. So the church stance during the pandemic, even though I totally disagree with it, I wasn't surprised. I didn't think it was done for evil, nefarious reasons. I believe it was done with good intentions, even though they were wrong, you know. So, so then you say, well, what about these bishops? So Bishop Vigano, here's another case of, oh, you'll love this guy. I had a friend. I thought it was kind of funny. At first I was excited. He's an anti-Catholic Protestant friend of mine. Strong, you know, but we agree on Trump and politics. We're like pretty close in our political beliefs. But religiously, he hates the Catholic Church. And he said, he goes, oh, you know, I found a bishop that I like, this guy Vigano. He's a big Trump supporter. So I watched him, and something wasn't right in my spirit. Like, I just felt like something ain't right with this guy. So I did my research on Vigano, Carlo Maria Vigano. And the first thing that I found was that he's worth $30 million. I'm like, how's a bishop worth $30 million? But apparently he inherited millions when he was younger. Him and his brother. His brother is a Catholic priest, and his brother had to take him to court because Carlo Maria Vigano stole $2 million from his brother. And the court in Italy found Vigano guilty and made him pay $2 million back to his brother. And in the testimony in the court, Vigano's brother said, yeah, my brother took my money. He told Pope Benedict he needed to stay in Rome to take care of me because I was disabled. That was a lie. He lied to the Pope. I was actually in Chicago, but he wanted to stay there so he could embezzle my money. Also, he had a younger sister who he stole, I think it was $300,000, and that was in a Swiss courts found him guilty. So he was guilty in 2 courts of law in 2 different countries of stealing money from his own family. And his brother said that nobody knows how wealthy we are because my brother, Carlo Maria Vigano, wanted to be a cardinal. And he said he thought it would look bad if he was a multimillionaire, like the Pope might not think that was a good idea to make him a cardinal. For some reason, he felt it looked bad. So he said, you know, let people know how rich we are. And then, you know, I noticed that the devil will use, the left uses tactics, and I believe it's demonically inspired. They use the tactic Saul Alinsky taught in Rules for Radicals, where they say, accuse your enemy of what you're doing. And I notice the devil will use that with all different people, whether they're conservative or liberals, but usually the left, he uses it with the left. So Vigano, when he was in America, in DC, he was given the responsibility to watch McCarrick, because there was a lot of, and I don't know if you noticed, McCarrick died yesterday, I guess at 94 years old. McCarrick was a laicized cardinal who was wicked and evil, you know, had homosexual relations, covered up for abuse, a very evil man who made it somehow to the ranks of cardinal. I mean, Judas made it to apostle, so these things happen. But Vigano was in charge of watching him. and a report was about to come out, and the report came out, and you can read it for yourself. And it said, it had pictures of Vigano and McCarrick partying, drinking champagne, and he wasn't supposed to let him travel out of DC, and they traveled all around the world together. He basically covered for McCarrick, and then right before the report came out, he accused the Pope. He's like, the Pope covered up for McCarrick, and he flipped the script, kind of like the old 70s movie, The Warriors, where it got the little rat Frank was like, the Warriors did it, when he was the one who shot the dude. I think his name was Cyrus, if you ever seen The Warriors. So he flipped the script, and then later he even accused the Pope of child abuse, and he had no evidence. It was just projecting what he was. And so to get his narrative out, to get the crowd behind him, he talked real conservative and Trump. So people that like Trump, that happen to be Catholic like myself, a lot of them were fooled and like, oh, he's one of us. Again, it's not who's right, it's what's right. And then he comes out and says the Pope isn't the Pope. And then he, like Altman and Martin Luther, calls the Pope an Antichrist. So the church calls him, says, come to Rome, we need to discuss this. And like, he was afraid to go, for whatever reason, he didn't go. So they said he excommunicated himself by denying church teaching, Canon Law 1369. So he's considered a canceled priest. And then I wondered what happened to him, so I kept researching him, and I found a priest named, well, not really a priest, but he called himself a priest, Father Chazelle. Father Chazelle is a priest in the resistance cult, which teaches, and he's on videos telling you this, anybody who was ordained or baptized after Vatican II, so all of us basically, except if you're really old, aren't Catholics. So they rebaptized Catholics, which is a mortal sin. And they reordained any clergy, priests, and bishops. And they confirmed Vigano was reordained. And they said who reordained him was a twice excommunicated bishop, Bishop Williamson. So if I go back in time to another canceled priest, Bishop Marcel Lefebvre was told by Pope St. John Paul II not to ordain 4 bishops he was planning on ordaining. And he directly disobeyed him. He disobeyed him, again, it's disobedience, and ordained these 4 bishops. And Pope St. John Paul II immediately, like didn't even bat an eye, excommunicated Lefebvre and the 4 bishops. Well, one of those bishops was Bishop Williamson. And later, during Pope Benedict's papacy, he asked if he could be reinstated. He claimed he repented, and Pope Benedict said, okay, he lifted the excommunication. Well, shortly after that, Bishop Williamson did the same thing Lefebvre did and ordained bishops or priests in direct disobedience to Pope Benedict. He also came out with horrible things, said that, the Holocaust never happened, and, ridiculous stuff like that. And Pope Benedict excommunicated him. So he was excommunicated twice, starts this cult, the resistance, the rebaptizing, reordaining, and that's where Vigano is today. And another video I posted with this Father Chazelle, a priest of the resistance, he was asked by a reporter, what about Strickland? Bishop Strickland. Another guy made a video, kind of the same analogy of the Medal of Honor guy being disobedient. They said, well, Vigano, Archbishop Vigano, is in his ear and he's listening. Strickland is listening, but he hasn't come to the place he needs to be, where he rejects Vatican II, rejects the new Mass, and rejects the Pope. So basically, they want him to teach heresy that Vatican II is evil, the new Mass is evil, this is what they teach, and Pope Francis isn't a Pope, to be a sedevacanthist. And they said Strickland is not there yet, but Vigano is working on him. Well, since that video, Bishop Strickland has come out and says Pope Francis teaches heresy. I haven't heard him say he's not the Pope yet. If he did, someone put it in the link. So he was suspended. He's not supposed, he's suspended. So he's not laicized and he's not excommunicated. He's suspended. But this is today's group. These are like the main players in today's group, what they call canceled priests. Bishop Strickland, Vigano, Altman. But Frank Pavone, he doesn't participate. He seems, and again, I'm just looking at what I see. I don't see him anywhere out preaching. He seems like he's repenting, in my humble opinion. But Altman, Vigano, Strickland, they're still out there, you know, bashing the church, bashing the Pope, bashing all the bishops. And, you know, a lot of people say, well, why only these conservative bishops? You know, why do they get attacked? You know, because they're pro-life or they're pro-traditional families. And I point to Archbishop Broglio, who I had on this podcast. I interviewed him like 2 weeks after he became the president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. This is a very conservative priest. He told me he's also the Archbishop for the Diocese of the Military. So every military chaplain who's a Catholic priest is under his command. And he said when Obama told the military that they need to perform same-sex marriages, he said he had the full backing of Pope Francis and went and told Obama, my chaplains will not perform same-sex marriages. My chaplains will not even counsel same-sex couples. And he said that was with the full 100% backing of Pope Francis. And Obama backed down. And only Protestant chaplains marry same-sex people in the military today. Catholic chaplains do not. Very conservative. And he was elected by all the bishops in America. So they elected a conservative. And this last election, he said the most important issue, and they voted, and he won this, the most important issues for American voters is abortion. And Pope Francis has said, abortion is the gravest of mortal sins. So here's a conservative bishop voted by other bishops, and he's not being harassed because he's not disobedient. It doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal. You've seen this. There was liberals and conservatives excommunicated. It comes down to obedience. Obedience. This is not a democracy. The church is not a democracy. The church is not Protestantism. The Catholic Church has a hierarchy. And it's funny because these people, some people that don't support Pope Francis, you know, anti-Catholic Catholics, so to speak, love the monarchy. They're like, oh yeah, we should have a king. We should have a Catholic king. And you can't even obey your Pope. How are you going to obey a king? So that's kind of a side note. And then the president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, before, his name escapes me, but the last election and election before that, they also said the most important issue is abortion. And these priests aren't getting harassed. Another good conservative bishop, Bishop Cordileone out of San Diego, Nancy Pelosi's bishop, he said publicly that the reason he banned Pelosi from taking the Eucharist is because he went to Pope Francis and said, listen, what should I do about this politician who's promoting abortion? He said, follow Pope Benedict when he was Cardinal Ratzinger's letter that he sent to all the bishops. And he said, follow that letter. He said, so I followed the letter, and it said, you know, number one goal is to bring them to repentance. You know, pastor them, talk to them. But if it gets to the point, and it's based on each bishop's discretion, if it gets to the point where you see they're just in total disobedience to the church, they're not listening, then you can ban them. So he banned Pelosi. So another conservative bishop that not being attacked, like everyone says, oh, the conservatives are being attacked. And you say, well, why wasn't he promoted to cardinal? They promoted all these liberal cardinals. And I did a video about these liberal cardinals, and I showed you one said some very heretical things. Pope Francis warned him, and he did a 180 flip and said the exact opposite. And the other one explained why he said it. And maybe we disagree with it, but it wasn't anything heretical. It was his his opinion how we should go about something. But why wasn't Bishop Corleone picked? And again, everything I'm saying is public, so I don't think I'm slandering anybody. I just want people to understand. Like, the same week that he was promoted to bishop, he had a DUI. So Pope Francis doesn't know every detail about every bishop. He has a lot of bishops in the world. So he has people that say, okay, we need a bishop for this area, America. We need a cardinal for here. And then they go through like checklists. Oh, well, this guy had a DUI, so maybe we need to wait and see, you know. And I'm not saying that's a grave sin. I mean, alcohol is not a sin, but and there were times when I used to drink that I could have been arrested for a DUI too. I'm sure you've experienced that too. So I'm not saying there's anything bad about them. I'm just saying there's things we don't know, you know, that disqualify people. So maybe someone seems liberal to us, but he had, you know, we're like, man, this guy's kind of liberal. But in Rome, they just look at boom, boom, boom. Okay, he's clean, not this, no allegations, no nothing. Okay, yeah. He has a doctorate in, you know, political science. Man, let's put him in Washington, D.C. You know what I'm saying? We don't know. But they're not being attacked because they're conservative. They're not being canceled because they were conservative. This is where the confusion is. They're being canceled for one reason, because they're disobedient to the church. Just basic. You know, there was a canceled priest years ago. His name is Saint Padre Pio, and he was canceled unjustly. He wasn't laicized, he wasn't excommunicated, but they told him he couldn't publicly do mass. He can only do it private for himself, and he couldn't even give spiritual advice. And I believe he couldn't hear confessions. I'm not positive about that, but basically he was canceled. And the people loved him. They knew this guy was a saint. They knew they were with a living saint. And the people were furious. And they came and they were mad. And they're screaming at the Pope. And they're like protesting. And St. Padre Pio came out and scolded them and says, you stop this. You repent of this behavior. Now you go home and you pray for our Pope. He didn't start a GoFundMe. He didn't say, oh, poor pitiful me, I've been canceled. No. You know what he said when he was handed the letter from his bishop that he was canceled? He said, the will of my superiors is the will of God. That's true faith. That's true religion. That's true Catholicism. That's true tradition. And that is radical. And there's another great saint that a lot of these anti-Francis, I call them never popers, like never Trumpers. Like I have friends, I'm a Republican, but I would never vote for Trump. They're never Trumpers. I'm a Catholic, but Pope Francis is the worst Pope ever. Never Poper, I call him. But they tend to like Pope St. Pius X, a great saint, great Pope. And when I read on this letter, they're always confused. They're like, oh, did he really say that? And I'm like, yeah. You see, again, what the enemy will do is accuse you of being what they are. And you'll see what I'm talking about with this letter. This is Pope Pius X, Saint Pope Pius X. The guy the SSPX is named after. The Pope is the guardian. This is his letter to his priest of that day. And he's warning about modernism. So what is modernism according to Pope St. Pius X? The Pope is the guardian of dogma and morals. He is the custodian of the principles that make families sound, nations great, souls holy. He is the counselor of princes and of peoples. He is the head under whom no one feels tyrannized because he represents God himself. He is the supreme Father who unites in himself all that may exist, that is loving, tender, divine. It seems incredible and even painful that there are priests to whom this recommendation must even be made. But we are regrettably in our age in this hard, unhappy situation of having to tell priests, love the Pope. And how must the Pope be loved? This is very important. Not in word nor in tongue, but in deed and in truth. When one loves a person, one tries to adhere in everything to his thoughts, to fulfill his will, to perform his wishes. And if our Lord Jesus Christ said of himself, if anyone love me, he will keep my word. Therefore, in order to demonstrate our love for the Pope, it is necessary to obey him. Therefore, when we love the Pope, there are no discussions regarding what he orders or demands, or up to what point obedience must go, and in what things he is to be obeyed. But when we love the Pope, we do not say that he has not spoken clearly enough. He's too ambiguous. Almost as if he were forced to repeat to the ear of each one of us the will clearly expressed so many times, not only in person, but with letters and other public documents. We do not place his orders in doubt, and the facile pretext of those unwilling to obey. That is not the Pope who commands it, but those who surround him. We do not limit the field in which he might and must exercise his authority. We do not set above the authority of the Pope that of other persons, however learned, even if they got a doctorate in philosophy, who dissent from the Pope, who even though learned are not holy, because whoever is holy cannot dissent from the Pope. This is the cry of a heart filled with pain, that with deep sadness I express, not for your sake, dear brothers, but to deplore you with the conduct of so many priests who not only allow themselves to debate and criticize the wishes of the Pope, but they're not even embarrassed to reach shameless and blatant disobedience with so much scandal for the good, with so much damage to souls. Pope St. Pius X, November 18th, 1912, letter to his priests. Modernism is disobeying the Pope. Modernism is dissenting from the Pope and the magisterium. Tradition is obeying the Pope, like St. Padre Pio showed us as the greatest example. The will of our superiors is the will of God. God bless. Stay Catholic. And please subscribe, because I can imagine I'm losing a lot of subscribers over this one. God bless.